So, time then for the press preview. It's our first look at Sunday's front pages. And tonight we'll be looking at those headlines with The Guardian's political correspondent, Aletha Adu, and the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Wallis Simons. We'll chat to them in a moment, but we'll show you the front pages before we do that, starting with the Sunday Express, which has word of a new government initiative designed to tackle antisocial behaviour by making people convicted of it wear uniforms, wash police cars and clean up graffiti. The paper says it's designed to win back voters in the northern Red Wall seats. While the Mail on Sunday reports that the Prime Minister intends to let victims of such crimes have a say in how perpetrators are punished. Here's the Observer leading with a sting by the campaign group Led by Donkeys, in which the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock and the former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng were filmed asking for £10,000 a day to carry out work for a fake South Korean firm. There's no suggestion they or two other Conservative MPs who had interactions with the imposters did anything illegal, and Sky News has contacted all of them for comment. Meanwhile, the Sunday Telegraph understands the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, could soon block injunctions by the European Court of Human Rights to stop flights carrying migrants being deported from leaving the UK. The Sunday People speaks to a former Royal Protection Officer who once guarded the Princess of Wales and says he fears there are more officers out there, like convicted murderer Wayne Couzens, who are still on the beat. A report from the Children's Commissioner, seen by the Sunday Times, is expected to claim that children as young as 8 have been strip-searched by the police. And the Sunday Mirror hears from Strictly Come Dancing judge Shirley Ballatz about her experiences with social media trolls. Don't forget, you can scan the QR code that you see on screen during the programme. Check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. And to chat about them, Aletha Adu and Wallis Simons. Great to see you this evening. Thank you for spending your Saturday evening with us. Lots to talk about in Sunday's papers. Let's start with this story on the front of the Sunday Express, announced this evening that the Prime Minister is going to crack down on antisocial behaviour. Aletha, what did you make of this?
It's quite interesting that he's deciding today to lead on this, given tomorrow there's going to be a huge debate in the House of Commons on, his immigration proposals. But nevertheless, also quite interesting that the Prime Minister is deciding to speak to, a large proportion of his voters via the Mail and the Express, discussing this big crime plan that really isn't anything new, to be honest. He's announcing plans to give communities their say on how antisocial behaviour could be tackled within their communities. It's almost echoing Keir Starmer's proposals to ensure that a Labour government would take such crimes and penalties extremely seriously. But it's quite interesting that when Keir Starmer announced his plans earlier this week, and it wasn't met with that much, goodwill, let's say, because a lot of people were claiming that he wasn't tackling the important crimes, let's say, and antisocial behaviour was one of the lesser ones. But also interesting again, the Prime Minister seems to be following suit, seems to be clearly worried that, people are, taking a listen to, what the Labour leader has to say, and he's also announcing his plans to, again, we heard of Boris Johnson, announcing so many ideas on big ideas on how to tackle crime, and nothing really came out of it. It'll be interesting to see what the Prime Minister thinks he can do within the next year. I don't think this is a way of really, cutting back and keeping people safe, keeping women and girls safe, that he is really yet to set out how exactly he can do. Maybe antisocial behaviour is something that he feels he might be able to achieve before the next election.
Yeah, the Express and also the Mail on Sunday, Jake, are splashing on this. The Mail going with the angle that those offenders who are put to work are going to have to clean up their crimes within 48 hours of being handed their punishments, and also that the victims will get a say in what they have to do. What do you think about that?
That's right. And the other eye-catching detail is that the perpetrators may be forced to wear shaming jumpsuits so that the community can see them while they're cleaning their graffiti off walls or whatever. This does seem like another red meat move that Rishi Sunak is making, and combined with the migration bill that's goes through Parliament tomorrow, it does appear that he's making a concerted effort to win back the red wall voters. And the problem that the Tories always face is that you've got the red wall voters in the north, with whom you're competing with Labour. And then you've got the Lib Dem swing seats in the south, who are more liberal-minded. And it's very difficult to win one and win the other one as well. So it seems like Rishi really is going for this strategy of the north, of introducing some really hard Tory policies in order to win votes up there. To my taste, this does feel a little bit much. I mean, the idea of dressing people up in jumpsuits and shaming them as they clean graffiti does feel a little bit medieval. But I think it will appeal to people who really suffer from antisocial behaviour in their local communities, particularly up north.
OK, let's move on to the front of the Observer, Aletha, and this sting, which shows that Kwasi Kwarteng, also Matt Hancock, two other MPs as well, agreed to work for £10,000 a day, certainly Hancock and Kwarteng, to further the interests of this fake South Korean firm. So it is a sting in one sense, but actually none of the four did anything wrong, as far as I'm aware.
No, they didn't actually, break any rules. But I mean, it's still an interesting investigation led by the campaign group led by donkeys. They essentially posed as a fake South Korean company and approached these four MPs, the former Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, Matt Hancock, Stephen Hammond, and the chairman of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. At a time when, the cost of living crisis continues to deepen, people are continuing to struggle with inflation still being incredibly high, despite the Prime Minister's pledges and missions and, vows to, tackle it and cut it as soon as possible. And we've got Kwasi Kwarteng and Matt Hancock agreeing to, further the interests of this firm for £10,000. Remarkable, given at around this time when the Led by Donkeys campaign group approached the MPs. Hancock's big WhatsApp reveals had been published by The Telegraph that put the government's handling of COVID under intense scrutiny. But if you see, there are videos of this that have been posted onto Twitter, I believe, and he seems pretty calm, seems pretty, relaxed about everything that's going on. And he's instantly, reacting to questions about fees and coming up with these incredible figures. I mean, it must be noted that Labour has, promised to scrap second jobs for MPs if they come into power. Again, it must be noted that they didn't agree to work for this fake firm, but I just think it's quite interesting that, such striking figures. I mean, Sir Graham Brady agreed to work for £6,000. The work of an MP is incredibly difficult. People are going through a lot of difficult times at the moment. And yet, we're still seeing them agreeing for such high fees. I think, it must be investigated. Also must be mentioned that I think at the start of this month, some new rules came into play that would stop MPs completely, advising other firms, which none of them did. But, why should they be able to claim £10,000 just for, showing up in South Korea, essentially? It's quite remarkable, really.
Yeah, good to get your thoughts on this, Jake, because as we were hearing, no suggestion of any wrongdoing. In fact, Stephen Hammond has told the paper that South Korea is a country that's close to my heart. I've got a substantial Korean community in my constituency. It's an important ally to the UK. Obviously, it was a fake company. I suppose the issue is whether MPs should be allowed to do outside work for, quite a lot of cash.
That's right. I mean, Matt Hancock is, in my view, one of the most repellent people in public life. So I'm not really keen to defend him or indeed the other figures involved. However, I find it a bit of a stretch, this story, because these people didn't do anything wrong. And if somebody comes to you and offers you a job for £10,000 a day, you'd be a fool to say no. Matt Hancock and Graham Brady, who was the other person who was involved in this sting, both of them are leaving Parliament after the next election. So it's reasonable for them to look at what's going to come next and how they can develop new relationships and new jobs and make money. And everybody wants to make money. I don't think there's a single viewer at home who would turn down 10 grand a day if it was offered to them.
I think it's important to note, to jump in, Jake, they weren't approached for £10,000. They themselves offered the fee of.
No, they were actually, the campaigners suggested a salary range between 8 and 16,000, I think. They went for this 10 grand in the middle. So it did originally come from the campaigners. But I think the wider issue is second jobs as a whole, if they are a good idea. At the moment, there are no rules or regulations governing second jobs for MPs. They're allowed to have them. And there are two potential problems that come from that. One is the amount of time they might spend on second jobs rather than serving their constituencies. And the other is the potential for conflict of interest. So I think all this points really to the need for regulation and for some kind of guidelines for MPs. They know exactly what to do.
OK, let's move on to the front of the Sunday Telegraph. We've already touched on the migrant story. Aletha, the Home Secretary could ban the European Court of Human Rights from grounding those Rwanda flights in order to quell this rebellion that the government's going to see next week.
Yes. I mean, I've been speaking to a number of Conservatives over the last week, specifically on this particular amendment of this illegal migration bill that's currently going through the Commons. And a lot of them are extremely worried about, their future. A lot of them are worried that they're going to end up within, the next year or 18 months, working for some smaller accountant public media firms, I've been told, sort of lining up jobs, as we were sort of alluding to in the previous story, because Rishi Sunak vowed, he promised the country that he will stop the boats, he will stop all boats, arriving at the Channel, he'll, make it really difficult for people to claim asylum. Even victims of modern slavery, people that have really struggled as a result of, our previous government's interferences in their countries. I won't go into too much detail on that, but they are coming here to seek refuge. And the Prime Minister has insisted, he will try and stop that in order to help his government get a grip on what is a failure on them in, handling applications, let's say. And a lot of them are worried that they just won't have enough time to complete this mission before the next election. So we've got a number of Red Wall Tory MPs who are now, threatening to rebel. We've got at least 60 Tories now, as I reported on Friday, essentially saying to Rishi, you need to really, come up with a tougher stance within this bill. And they believe that the tough stance would be to block judges from being able to grant injunctions to prevent people from being deported. Again, it's really outrageous. There are a number of moderate Tories that are disagreeing with this and won't be taking part in these votes on these particular amendments. But Rishi really has a problem on his hands. He throwing red meat around, him and Suella Braverman are equally as guilty as doing this, is really not enough to tackle the matter of fact that they're just not processing asylum applications enough. Why are people being left in hotels for months, up to years on end, people that helped our government in operations when we were in need of help? Why can they not have a safe route to come to this country? Why are there no safe routes? And there are a number of amendments that have been proposed by Tories as well as opposition parties to encourage the government to create safe routes so people are not making the horrible decision to come into our country via this difficult and tragic journey. But whether the government
I'm sorry to wrap you up. We're out of time. Jake, I'll get your thoughts on this story next hour, if that's OK. We do need to move on, but thank you both for the moment. Coming up after the break, a new report is expected to claim that children as young as 8 have been strip-searched by the police. We'll discuss that and more next. Hello again, part 2 of the press preview. Aletha and Jake are still with us. Jake, front of the Sunday Times. I mean, this story sounds horrific. Children are routinely being stopped and strip-searched by police, according to a new report.
That's right. I mean, coming after all the recent revelations about abuse within the Metropolitan Police in particular and other forces as well, this really comes as a very, very depressing development. 3,000 children have been strip searched over the last 4 years in England and Wales. About a quarter of them are between the ages of 10 and 15, with a small number as young as 8. And black kids are 6 times as likely to be strip searched as white children. All of this is, as I say, the most depressing development on the police story. There have been lots of calls for root and branch reform of the police, both the armed units and other units as well, after the revelation of their WhatsApp conversations containing racist and misogynistic content. And now this does seem to be an endemic problem of strip searching children. If you recall, some time ago, there was a black girl who was strip searched while on her period, and that created a great scandal. But it now seems as if it's almost a systematic practice that really does need to be addressed as soon as possible.
Yeah, Aletha, what do you make of this? The Children's Commissioner calling on police chiefs to get their act together.
Yes, and yet we've got our Prime Minister on this remarkable crime blitz trying to woo a particular portion of the country in order to save his job. We had one of the most horrifying and damning reports from Louise Casey, outlining the horrific practices of the Met Police, classing them as institutionally racist, sexist, and homophobic, as we all knew. I don't think anyone was surprised by that. And yet, in line with these horrifying statistics, also from Rachel D'Souza, we're still not hearing anything really from the Prime Minister, like directly from the Prime Minister. He could have used today's papers as a chance to do that, and he has refused to do so. Why is that? I think many people at home will be thinking.
Yeah, the Met Commissioner, of course, accepting the findings, but saying he didn't believe that the problems were institutional. Let's move on to this story, Jake, in the Express, following on from the King's first overseas trip to France being cancelled.
Yes, the Express is suggesting that the real reason why the French cancelled the King's trip was because he was scheduled to have a sumptuous banquet in Paris, and the images of that would have really wound the country up even more than they are already. We're seeing riots all over France, some really quite serious riots, missiles being thrown, fires being lit. We've had some quite serious injuries sustained by protesters, including one who lost a finger, another who lost his sight with a stun grenade being fired by police. And all of this is part of discontent in France, not just at the attempt to raise the retirement age by 2 years to 64, but also on the whole, the sort of poor level of public services and a president who's out of touch. Public services in France is the highest taxed country in Europe, and they expect their public services to be decent, and they're just not. Trains are always late, things aren't working in France, and meanwhile Macron has this sort of technocratic career civil servant manner that really gets up the nose of the French, and this is the result.
Aletha?
I just think it would have been quite nice to hear from some sort of palace official expressing their, sadness and, the fact that it's not a great situation out in France, apart from the fact that, the attempts to continue this French-UK relationship has been postponed. It wasn't the best statement, in my opinion, and, lacked a bit of empathy and emotion there.
Yeah, OK. Let's have a look at this story as well about Agatha Christie. It's on the front of the Telegraph. It follows on from a number of such stories, Jake, doesn't it, of late, including sort of Roald Dahl.
Yeah, I find this really appalling, actually, the way that modern editors feel that they can ride a coach and horses through some classic works of literature and change them according to modern sensibilities, or some modern sensibilities. Agatha Christie is the best-selling author ever. She's second only to Shakespeare in terms of sales. And now her Poirot and Miss Marple books are being edited heavily on the advice of sensitivity readers without people being told about it. So if you pick up your Kindle and download a Poirot story, it'll be different to what Agatha Christie originally intended. And this is all very disturbing. It presents a sort of whitewashing of the past. how are we able to learn from our history and to move on if our history is being edited retrospectively and the literature that goes with it as well? It all seems like an attempt to really, sort of infantilize the public and prevent them from coming across anything nasty. I mean, some of the examples are really absurd that were edited out. And so it's all very worrying indeed.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find some of the examples. It says here, stripping the works of numerous passages containing descriptions, insults or references to ethnicity, particularly for characters that Christie's protagonists meet outside the UK. What do you think, Aletha?
No, I completely agree with Jake, actually. It is incredibly worrying, and it does, as he said, seem like the public is being infantilized. I think, yes, absolutely, maybe some sort of annotation marks could have been added in place of just literally editing chunks out and changing what Christie would have written in order to preserve that history. And we could have compared to see with what, they would have suggested. But yeah, must remember, books are also essentially like a form of art as well. Is that what Christie would have wanted her art to be left as? It's just really disappointing that we're seeing this flurry of, really respected novels. She's not the first that this has happened to in the last few months. Just being completely wiped out, essentially.
Yeah, interesting to get your views. Thank you very much. Speak to you again in an hour.